Welcome to Short Conversations with BRF Ministries. BRF Ministries is the home of Anna Chaplaincy, BRF Resources, Messy Church and Parenting for Faith, and we aim to inspire, equip and support people of all ages to grow in Christian faith. Find out more at brf.org.uk. Hello and welcome back to Short Conversations with BRF Ministries. I'm Iona, your host, and today we're going to be talking to Maggi Dawn, author of Beginnings and Endings, which is a book of daily readings from Advent to Epiphany. Maggi will be sharing about seeking spiritual renewal over Advent, living well in the in-between, and much, much more. Let's head over to our conversation with her now. Maggi Dawn is a priest at the Episcopal Church in the USA. She is also a professor of theology at the University of Durham and is the author of several books, hymns, and contemporary worship songs. Her latest book with BRF Ministries is Beginnings and Endings, and it looks at the beginnings and endings of Advent and how these can help guide us as we seek to follow Jesus in the 21st century. Maggi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Would you mind starting off by just telling us a bit about yourself and the background of Beginnings and Endings?
Sure. I started my career as a songwriter in the music industry, and increasingly I was getting involved in music for Christian festivals and for church. I was writing hymns for my local church, and very gradually that took me more into ministry-oriented stuff. And so when I went to forward for ordination, I studied theology at a very intense academic level. And academic theology, I love it. It's great fun and it's a complete adventure. But it is in a very specialized language, the sort of language you can't really, it's a bit like if you're trying to talk computer technology. Sure. Other people who do your thing will understand you, but the rest of the world doesn't really. And so one of the things that I wanted to do as I was emerging from that very intense period of study was I felt like there's such wonderful stuff in academic theology that never makes its way to the pulpit. And just everybody should have a chance to look under the lid of this a little bit. So I began writing in this style where I would take scholarly stuff and reinterpret it in everyday language. And Beginnings and Endings was, I think, the first book. I'd been doing it on a blog back in the day when blogs were the thing. Now I have a Substack, I've brought my up to date. But the Beginnings and Endings in its first edition was the first time I put all of that together in book form. And so, that was the impetus behind it, along with the fact that I love Advent. And so it was a great place to start.
Oh, amazing. That's amazing because I absolutely know what you mean. When I hear people talk about theology in a really in-depth way, I'm like, this sounds amazing, but it's beyond me. So that's such a skill, actually, to be able to take that and translate it into a way that people can digest a lot more easily. So that sounds brilliant.
Right.
And you said that Beginnings and Endings was originally written quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about that and maybe the differences in the culture and language and society now than when it was first written?
Well, it's nearly 20 years since the first edition.
That's amazing.
And at the time, I was raising my little son, who was about, he must have been 6 or 7 years old back then. And I was a college chaplain as well as a lecturer in the university at that time. It's only 20 years. And I think the thing that astonished me when I came back to revise the text for a second edition was how fast language has changed.
Wow, okay.
I know, if you've ever read Shakespeare or Chaucer or the King James Bible, that sort of old English, oldie worldy English.
Yeah.
Immediately, you think, language has really changed, hasn't it, in centuries. I wasn't quite aware, I think, until I read my own writing from 20 years ago, that it changes a lot, just a couple of decades. And so one of the adventures in the book for me was reading my own stuff and thinking, well, I know what I was trying to say, and I still think that. But how it doesn't sound right, because it's dated. And one of the things that I teach on in university is precisely how the language that we use to say what we say, it's not just like wrapping paper. It's not like there's a pure idea that you can wrap up and convey through language. The language creates the meaning. And so if the language is wrong, it's not just nice meaning but bad language. The language is the meaning. So having the chance to update the language and make it mean what it's supposed to mean, or at the same time, to consider how I have changed in 20 years and how my understandings of things have changed. So in an assortment of ways, it was a really interesting adventure in thinking about the rapidity of change over a couple of decades.
That must have been amazing to read it back and realise all those changes. As you said, it's probably not something that you really realise day to day, but when you look back at something, how times have developed, and for you, how you've developed, I suppose, as well.
Yeah, that's true. Well, my 6-year-old son is now very grown up, and
yes, times changed.
Some of the stories in the book made me think, gosh, really, elementary school, primary school, wow.
Yeah, wow, time ago. Oh, thank you. And you said at the start, really, that you love Advent, and this book obviously focuses on Advent. What does Advent symbolise for you?
Well, I think on a very human level, one of the reasons I love it is because growing up, I used to sing in the school choir and play in the orchestra, and I love, like, when the shop windows start to be full of Christmas lights and the smells of gingerbread and all that kind of stuff start to emerge. And so for me, Advent and the last couple of weeks of school term was all about anticipation. And you get this sort of slightly holding your breath feeling that something fantastic was about to happen. And every day something fantastic did happen, but it was still anticipation for something else that was going to happen. So emotionally, I just have this kind of slightly wow feeling about Advent. And it was so intense, I think, when I was a teenager, that when Christmas actually arrived, it almost seemed slightly quiet and dull by comparison. But in fact, Advent, theologically speaking, is exactly about anticipation. It's about holding your breath and waiting for the big event, which is, of course, Christ's birth. But then there's a secondary meaning in that we now know that Christ's birth happened, so we're waiting to celebrate something that's already happened.
Yes.
But we're also waiting for the second coming of Christ, which, is a mystical and strange concept where we can talk about it and talk about what we're certain of, but in the end, nobody completely knows what we're talking about, in the same way that you don't really know what you're talking about when you speak of heaven. You can say, well, it's quite legitimate to talk about it, and it's not fairy stories, but we still cannot say definitively in lovely factual logic, this is what we know about it. Nevertheless, this promise that there is more to come in the faith is wrapped up in Advent as well. So yeah, it's all about anticipation. But I'm a big old mushpot, and I love the fairy lights even now.
Oh, me too. I think a lot of people can relate to that. It's true though, it's all built up, isn't it, in this big anticipation, and it's all part of it, the build up and the excitement, and all leading to that moment. So I'm sure a lot of people can absolutely relate to that.
But I also think perhaps something that we could value more in Advent is to just hold the anticipation and not wear ourselves out. It's almost like if you do a big event too soon and you do it over and over and over again, it's almost like you've had Christmas 25 times and you're sick of it.
Yeah, and then by the time it actually comes, it's a bit of an anticlimax because it's.
Yeah. So finding ways of celebrating Advent as anticipation, not as doing the big event too soon, I think is
That's such a good point. Yeah,
it's a bit of imagination, but it's worth it.
absolutely. And can you tell me a bit more about the sort of themes of beginnings and endings in the context of Advent?
Yes, absolutely. I started with the idea of beginnings because Advent, technically speaking, is the beginning of the church year. It's kind of New Year's Eve of the church year.
Mm.
If you think about when the year begins, you might think of January the 1st with your New Year's resolutions. I think a lot of people feel like the new year starts around the beginning of September when you're just getting ready to go back to school. And the school year always feels like the new year.
Yeah.
But in church terms, it's Advent. That's the New Year's Eve. And we start through Advent to trace the whole story of salvation from beginning to end. But it's also true that every beginning in life experience, every beginning implies an ending of something else.
Mm.
And that can be a happy thing or a sad thing. You know, the ending of something can be anything from a little bit sad to quite tragic, or it can be actually a lovely thing. You know, it's like, I've done that chapter of my life and it was just great, like graduating, you know, it's absolutely wonderful experience. And then the next thing is ready for you. But of course, most of what happens to us in life is what happens in between the beginnings and the endings. And so in the book, quite a lot of the readings are like very short chapters that take about 5 or 6 minutes to read. And a lot of those little mini chapters focus on biblical characters who set out on new beginnings and then on what happens to them in the in-between times. Just to see, you know, how they teach us about how that works in life.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, as you said, so much of life is the in-between, isn't it? Whether that's, you know, the in-between of birth and death, or that's the in-between of your day-to-day. And that's so important to touch on. So I think that sounds incredible.
Thank you.
If people who are listening are looking to sort of seek maybe spiritual renewal over Advent, maybe they are thinking of it as a sort of start to a new year, like you mentioned before, what would you suggest to them that might be helpful for that?
I love the idea of seeking spiritual renewal. I think that's just, I love the way you've put that, actually. Really nice concept. I think there are just as many ways to do that as there are people on the earth. You know, each person can find their own way. The classic rule, of course, is you're told you should pray every day and you should read your Bible.
Yeah.
I remember being told when I was a teenager and first encountered Christianity that this is what you had to do. You have to get up early every morning and say a prayer and read your Bible. And I'm just not a morning person. And I failed over and over and over again at, you know, this thing I was supposed to do.
Mm.
And I think to seek spiritual renewal, you have to find something that you can do, not something that sounds like very worthy, but actually it's just impossible. And if first thing in the morning is not going to work, then you have to pick another time of day. But also what sort of activity does it need to be? And different times in my life, I've found different ways of saying a prayer or grounding myself in the presence of God, let's put it that way. I remember one time when I first emigrated to the United States, and I was a little bit, just culturally, a little bit lost while I got the hang of how the culture works. It's more different than I'd expected. And I sort of had to slightly relearn the language, and I was a little bit homesick. And so to get through that first period of time, I just thought of this idea that every day I would find one thing that was lovely or exciting or made me feel good and be thankful and say thank you for it. And then I began to record these in a slightly random journal fashion. Some of them I put up on Facebook and I called them Reasons to Be Glad, number with a hashtag. But I couldn't actually keep them in the right order, so I just made up a number every time. So It got to reasons to be glad, number 4,037. Let's say was, 6,023 or something. But it would be anything as simple as I'm looking out of my window right here in New England, and the leaves have turned the most glorious shade of red, and the sun is shining through them. It is breathtaking. And just to stop for 5 minutes and look at it and consciously say, thank you, God. Look at that. Then that little moment can return to you through the day. Or it might be a lovely encounter with a person, or it might be a little piece of good news. It could be just anything, really. But one thing to be thankful for. And in quite a difficult time, that was a simple but doable thing. I guess what I'm saying is it's got to be doable, whatever it is that you do. If you're in a great place and you've got time to spare, of course, setting yourself, a more challenging thing is great. And I suppose what I'm supposed to say, given the podcast is about my book, is, hey, a little reading from my book every single day of Advent. And if you want to do that, well, then I hope that will help.
Absolutely. That's such a good reminder. And I think that's also something that's very manageable, isn't it? Of, like you said, when there's something that might be a bit overwhelming or there's a lot going on, just taking a small thing to stop and think, I'm grateful for that. And it's a good reminder for yourself and a good sort of manageable thing to do is really, really good.
I agree with that. And I also am reminded of something that, if I can remember it correctly, one of the Desert Fathers in the 2nd century apparently advised a younger monk on the habit of prayer. And the monk went away and he prayed and prayed and prayed, and he came back and every day reported back to his mentor. And one day he came back and he said, I prayed today and I found the presence of God. And the mentor said to him, then that is what you should do every day. In other words, if you find a prayer that resonates, do it again tomorrow and the day after and the day after. You don't have to do something new every single day, but just the same thing until it runs out of steam, and then you find another way to pray. But most people find that there are ways of praying that just don't help. And if they don't, well, don't do it, because there's plenty more ways. You could pray silently. You can do a stream of consciousness to God. You can read ready written prayers from a prayer book. There's just endless ways.
That's such brilliant advice. Yeah. And I think that also kind of links back to your first point of it's not like a one size fits all. It's not, this is how we should be doing it. This is how everybody will pray, or everybody will have a quiet time. Whatever it looks like is different for every person. And it's about finding what works for you. That's such a good way of putting it, I think.
I have a friend who guides centering prayer. I sometimes do retreats with her. And she just gets everybody to sit and physically just relax so that you can actually sit comfortably for 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And then to begin to focus on the presence of God and just nothing else, but just God is here. And after a few minutes, she'll then lead you through a little exercise. But for me, that 5 minutes of nothing else but relax, God is here. God is here right now. For me, that could transform my day.
That's so powerful, especially in a busy life. Like, we all lead busy lives, and I think just taking that, it can be so powerful. Thank you. In the book, you also talk about how all the Gospels start the story of salvation differently.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about these differences and why you think that is so significant?
Yeah, certainly. I really am fascinated by this. It's very much the case that in any literature, in a novel or an autobiography or a history or in the movies even, where you start the story and where you finish the story completely frames everything else that you see. It sets the scene, it sets the reader or the watcher up to understand the story in a particular context. And the gospel writers do this, each of the four of them. And actually there's also some gospels that didn't make it into the Bible, but they do the same as well. They're not scriptures, but they are very interesting holy writings. And Matthew and Luke both begin by relating how this new beginning in Christ's birth fits into the whole story of salvation. But Matthew takes you back as far as Abraham. So what he's doing is saying that the birth of Christ is continuous with the story of salvation right back to when God called Abraham. So this is not a new beginning that leaves the past behind. This is a new beginning that's continuous with where we've already been. And Luke does it slightly differently. He also traces right the way back through history, but he goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. So in Luke, he's showing you how Christ is not just continuous with the story of salvation, but is the answer to the fall of humanity in Genesis. And even goes back beyond the call of God to Abraham. This is about all of humanity for all time. And Christ comes into that context. Mark, interestingly, skips the nativity story altogether. He doesn't tell us about birth of Christ. He just launches straight in with the adult ministry of Jesus. And in the way he tells the story, the effect is that you feel that you've just been drawn immediately into the story of the disciples following Jesus. And you begin to feel like you're one of the disciples. It's a very skillful way of telling the story. So rather than standing back and looking at the autobiography of Jesus, you're suddenly in it. And Mark also uses a particular tense. He uses the present continuous tense throughout his gospel. So rather than saying, once upon a time this happened, he sounds a bit like a TV reporter who sticks the microphone in people's faces and then comes forward and says, now, oh, look, Jesus is coming down the mountainside. Oh, Jesus is now speaking to his disciples. Jesus is doing this. Jesus is doing that. And the language makes it feel as if you're right there, right now. So the way Mark begins is to say, you're in this. Get ready. Buckle up. We're going for a ride here. And then John, brilliantly, does a kind of philosophical, theological take, starting with the mystical beginning of everything. He takes you back before creation into the dark, imagined, what was God like before any of this? And he places Christ there and makes it explicit that Christ was present before creation, at creation, in creation. That's, he's very philosophical, John. I really love all the Gospels for different reasons. But yeah, how they begin frames what's happening, and actually how they end also has everything to do with how you read the stories of the resurrection or the ascension, or in Mark's Gospel, there is no resurrection. So that's another of his little literary ticks. So yeah, it's a literary thing, really.
Yeah, that's fascinating the way that you described that. That's, amazing to have all those different styles and ways of telling the story. That's amazing. Thank you. And I guess we've touched on this a little bit before about the sort of living in the in-between. But I wonder if you could just expand on it a bit about, Advent obviously focuses a lot on the beginning, the birth of Jesus, but there's also a lot of anticipation with the second coming of Christ. How can we live well in the in-between, as we would say, whilst awaiting this future fulfillment?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Iona. I think it's a question that comes into really sharp focus at times when the world is in flux or in a bit of a crisis. And it seems to me that just the last few years, we've been through a series of situations where, in world terms, we feel like the rug has been pulled from under our feet a bit.
Yeah.
When pandemic, I know movies were made and people anticipated, but we didn't really understand it till it happened. Just
the reality of it hits. Yeah.
just how incredibly disruptive and alarming that was going to be. And we've emerged from that. But there's wars. I mean, there's always been wars in the world, but there are particular wars at the moment that just seem to have massive world consequences, and a lot of economic uncertainty and political unrest and so on. In the middle of all of that, I think living in between for a Christian is going to perhaps be a matter of hope. And I don't mean optimism. I don't mean, it's all going to be all right. I mean the sort of hope that it roots you in the sure knowledge that God is with us and that it will make sense in the end. And that sure knowledge, that's what the hope is, then enables you to live through the difficult and unacceptable and problematic stuff. There's a great quote by Václav Havel, who started life as a playwright before he went into politics. But he said, hope is definitely not the same thing as optimism. It is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something will make sense, regardless of how it turns out. And he just puts that so concisely and so beautifully. And really, he's saying almost the same thing that Julian of Norwich, the 14th century Christian writer, wrote. She gets I'm sure you've heard of Julian of Norwich. People slightly misquote her all over the internet by taking that one phrase, all shall be well and all manner of things shall be well.
Yeah.
And out of context, that does sound as if what she's saying is, oh, don't worry, everything's going to be all right.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you read the pages roundabout, she doesn't say that. She says, God did not say you will not suffer, but he did say you will not be overcome. And when she says all shall be well, what she's really saying is it's all going to make sense in the end, even though right now, and she lived through the bubonic plague, which was like COVID on steroids,
Yeah.
She knew what she was talking about. But I think that hope in the in-between times is perhaps the thing that we need to hold on to.
Yeah, you're so right. I think the power that hope has in that in-between, like we were saying, is incredible. And that's something that we as Christians can hold on to. And that's so true how you said that it's different to optimism and that we can hold that so much more powerfully. I think that's so helpful. Thank you so much. And I love that quote.
Yes.
Something that you do in the book, which I think is brilliant, is that you use the 4 candles on an Advent wreath to highlight some of the key characters in the unfolding story of salvation. Can you talk us briefly through these characters?
Oh, yeah. Well, again, I've told you I love fairy lights and sparkly things. So
yes,
the Advent wreath is just a lovely thing. And it is interpreted in different ways. This is not the only way to interpret it, but one way, which I particularly like, is that the first and it also, if you follow the lectionary readings in a liturgical tradition, fit in with the readings that belong to each of the 4 Sundays of Advent. So the first one focuses on what we used to call patriarchs. This is one of the ways the language has changed in 20 years. We'd now perhaps call them ancestors in faith. Because patriarchy, of course, is a very questionable word nowadays. But our ancestors in faith, thinking especially here of Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and all the people that followed in that family, who left one place to go and look for a promised land. And they, under God's guidance, were looking for a place where they could live in the presence of God and God's kingdom would be manifest. So they were looking for a place. And then in the second Sunday and the second candle, the focus moves on to the prophets who prophesy about the birth of Christ. But the thing that's interesting about the prophets is that they come long after the land had been settled. And what they seem to say is, well, the land is hallowed and we love the land, but that's enough. We're not living under the unbroken presence of God, and the kingdom of God is not perfectly manifest. So the land is good, but it's not enough. We're looking now not for a place, but for a time in the future when God's presence will be manifest and we will live under God's rule. Jump ahead to the third Sunday and the third candle, and this is the Sunday when John the Baptist is commemorated with his message about the coming Christ. And what John the Baptist said is, well, the place is very close and the time is now. So we've got the place, and we've got the time. Christ is near, Christ is among us, but it's like he's looking around the crowd and saying, can you spot him? I know he's here somewhere. He's very close. He's here among us. The fourth candle is for Mary. And Mary brings the whole message home because Mary represents Christ within us. In her experience, quite physically and literally, Christ within her. And if you have a fifth candle in the middle of the wreath, which some people do, then again, that reinforces that fourth message that Christ is Emmanuel, God with us and within us. So not away in another place, not waiting for another time, not just close, but actually here and now within us. And so I use those 4 ideas to break the book into 4 sections and focus on those ideas.
I love how visual that is as well. You can picture that so clearly. And as you said about that candle in the middle, that's just perfect. That's amazing. Completes it so well. You describe Christmas as in the book as a sort of hinge moment, not an ending. And I've talked about beginnings and endings. But can you tell us a bit more about this and why that's how you describe it? And what difference does that make to our day-to-day lives?
Yeah, I gave some thought to this because it was, as I said at the beginning, I grew up through my teens loving Advent, and then Christmas was kind of the end of it for another year, and then that's it for a year, and we'll do it again next year.
Yeah.
But in theological terms, Christmas, the coming of Christ, is in one sense a new beginning. But it's a continuation. It's not a completely new beginning. As we said in the way that Matthew and Luke tell the stories of the Nativity, it's a beginning that is a fresh start, but it's not cutting you off from what went before. So it's a continuation. And at the same time, it's not quite an ending either. It is the end of Advent, but it looks immediately forward to the future, to what happens next in the life of Christ, and ultimately to the second coming of Christ. And so that takes us back really to being in between. That's where we live in the promise and the hope. And that does, for me, focus a really important theological idea, which is that in our spiritual journey, there are spiritual traditions that think of life as going round and round in a circle and repeating over and over again. But the Christian theological idea is linear. It's not cyclical. You start somewhere and you're going somewhere, and there is a destination at the end. Augustine in the 4th century wrote about this, and he described your life as a pilgrimage, that you're going from somewhere to somewhere, and the end of life, the destination, is heaven. So you're not going round in circles. So I think for that reason, I think of Christmas as it's sort of a beginning and it's sort of an ending, but mostly it's this hinge between the beginnings, the endings, and the in-between. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's such a good way of framing it, I think, because as you said, I think a lot of people kind of get to the end of Christmas and think, oh, that's over now. That's the end of that season. Like, next thing. But to have that as an in-between, as a sort of in-between the beginning and the end, is a lovely way of framing it and sort of looking at it at a different angle.
Yeah. You've also got the idea, actually, historically, of the 12 days of Christmas.
Well, yeah, that's very true.
With our commercial situation, the 12 days of Christmas is often reinterpreted for us as being the 12 days running up to Christmas. But historically, Christmas Day was day one, and it went on for 12 days.
Yeah.
And all of the feasts in the church year were not all of them. The major seasonal feasts like Christmas and Easter are not one day, they're days and days and days. And so the Christmas season actually goes on for more than a day.
Yeah.
So that's something to say. And of course, there are great stories about medieval Christmas and when Christmas got cancelled by the Puritans and everything. So
Yeah.
12 days.
Building that anticipation as well for longer. And yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. And just to close, really, sort of as you personally prepare for Advent this year, what beginnings and endings and in-betweens, I suppose, are you looking forward to? And are there any that you're slightly more apprehensive about?
That's a really interesting question. I think, apprehensive is interesting. I mean, there's plenty about right now to make us anxious. The news just seems full every day of high-level anxiety. I sometimes wake up and think we need some new beginnings right now. It seems like we're stuck in the mud with all sorts of situations politically and culturally, where we're stuck in a very polarized and quite hostile situation. And I would love to be able to break out of that and have real conversation with people. Conversation with people that don't agree with me, but conversation that's like, well, tell me more about that. Maybe I'm wrong. Perhaps I could reconsider what I think, rather than the kind of polarized conversations that seem to be everywhere at the moment. So I would love to see some new beginnings like that. On a personal level, I'm happy to say that there are new beginnings in our family life. We've had a couple of weddings recently in our family, and we've
amazing.
just had the announcement that another one is coming. So there's lots of lovely stuff to look forward to. And there's some sad stuff too, that we've lost one or two of our older relatives. I'll tell you what, Iona, there's one of my favorite ever poems, and one that I turn to often because it seems to encapsulate a kind of Christian idea about beginning, is that whenever I feel like, I just can't get out of bed this morning, or what's the point, or we might as well give up, or those sort of apprehensive and giving up kind of feelings. There's this marvelous poem by Brendan Kennelly, Irish poet, called Begin, and it works its way through a lot of different beginning lines about beginning the day and beginning relationships and beginning all sorts of things. But it closes with these marvelous lines where he says, though we live in a world that dreams of ending, that always seems about to give in, something that will not acknowledge conclusion insists that we forever begin. Something that will not acknowledge conclusion. He's sort of wrapped up like this idea that however difficult things seem, we're not done yet. We're not done yet. And like Augustine, we're not going round and round in a circle. We are going somewhere. And to begin again is not to wipe the slate clean and do something brand new. It's just to pick yourself up and carry on the next day of the journey, the next piece of the journey, because we are on the way to somewhere. We've come from somewhere, all the way back to Abraham, all the way back to Adam and Eve. We've come from somewhere and we're going somewhere. So every day is an in-between, but every day is just one more step towards where we're going. That's a bit of a wordy answer.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you. What a beautiful poem. Like, even just the ending. That is so...
Brendan Kennelly, do go and look him up. Gorgeous poem.
I absolutely will. That sounds amazing. Yeah, thank you. Oh, Maggie, thank you so much. You've shared so much wisdom. I have certainly learned so much from our conversation. And as I said, Beginnings and Endings is out now from BRF Ministries. So do go and get your hands on a copy of that and do enjoy it very much. Thank you so much, Maggie, for your time today.
Thank you.
That was such an insightful chat with Maggie. If you want to find out more about her book, Beginnings and Endings, as well as where you can find her online, we've got all the links for you down below in the show notes, so do make sure to check those out. Thank you so much for joining us today on Short Conversations, and we'll see you next week for another episode. Bye!